Nishiyama walked off the Konishiki touring party in summer 1895 at the post town of Matsusaka in Ise province. Of the dozens of rikishi who deserted in the late Meiji era, almost all came back weaker. The veterans agreed on that. One came back stronger, and that one matters. 8 years later, he held a Yokozuna license, the highest rank in sumo. What black and white had flattened becomes legible. Summer 1895. Makushita rank. Nishiyama, later known as Hitachiyama Taniyaman, left the Konishiki tour without permission and disappeared west into Nagoya Sumo. 3 years passed before Tokyo saw him again. How did a deserter become the 19th Yokozuna? The answer lies in 3 years the official record passes over. Summer 1895. At Matsusaka in Ise province, a low-ranked Tokyo rikishi named Nishiyama walked off a touring party. A blurry 1896 photograph survives from the gardens of the Mito Tokugawa residence in Tokyo. Among the figures walking the grounds is Emperor Meiji himself, caught in faint silhouette. The image fixes the domain Hitachiyama was born into. The lineage steps forward. The story begins in Mito. He was born Yaoimon on November 3, 1873, at the house of Ichige Takanari in Kamimachi, Sanomaru. The Ichige family had served the Mito domain for generations. His grandfather had been archery instructor to the lord, famed across the domains for drawing a strong bow. 4 men posed together in a Meiji-era photograph. 2 rikishi in formal kimono, 2 figures in Western suits. The composition fixes the meeting point between the Sumo world and the world of Meiji journalism and politics. 2 worlds meet inside one frame. His father refused. The Ichige line, he said, were Mito retainers, not rikishi. The intercession came from a cousin, Watanabe Shosui, a Keio graduate who wrote for the Jiji Shimpo and later sat in the Diet. Shosui measured the young man's physique, judged the strength real, and persuaded the parents to consent. A postcard portrait from around 1910 shows Hitachiyama in an ornate keshomawashi, the ceremonial apron, its tiger design framed inside a decorative border. The physique is formidable, the bearing already that of a champion. The image looks ahead by 2 decades. At 18, he entered the stable of Hitachi-iwa Torakichi, a Mito rikishi who would later become the Oyakata Deiwan no Umi, the stable master of his own house. He took the Shikona Nishiyama. Before he reached Sandenmi, sumo enthusiasts had given him a nickname. They called him Ijin, outsider, for his sharp features and pale complexion. In 1891, the man in the postcard did not yet exist. His sumo at the time was unremarkable. 2 rikishi crouch on the clay, locked in the moment before contact. Hitachiyama on one side, Umegatani on the other. The referee, Yoshida Okaze, standing between them. The photograph belongs to a later year, but it records a rivalry whose first day was 1895. His first surviving bout record came at the May 1894 Basho, the tournament, at the Nidanmei rank, 3 wins, 2 losses. In January 1895, he climbed to 4-1. On day 10, he met, for the first recorded time, a young wrestler named Umegaya. He won. Nobody yet read it as the start of a rivalry. By June 1895, he had moved into the Makushita division. He posted 2 and 3. 3 rikishi performed the do-hyo iri, the ring-entering ritual, on an outdoor do-hyo, the clay ring, attendants in formal dress behind them, a crowd pressing in from beyond the frame. The scene fixes what a touring party looked like arriving in a provincial town. The road west opens beyond the frame. June 1895, Makushita. He lost to Otori, beat Izan, lost to Tatekawa, beat Namiwatari, lost to Awajinata. Then the basho ended, and the Konishiki touring party assembled to leave Tokyo. The party would move west through Owari and Mino and cross into Ise. He joined it. A woodblock print of Takasago Uragoro stands the wrestler at the center of his ring. Yellow checkered apron, the straw bales of the dohyo at his feet, the formal weight of a world Nishiyama was about to step out of. The wrestler walks out of the picture. At Matsusaka, a post town on the road to the Grand Shrine, the Rikishi were quartered for the night. And at Matsusaka, Nishiyama left, taking nothing official, leaving no forwarding address. The tour resumed without him. The Tokyo Association did not list his name on a banzuke, the ranking sheet, for the next 3 years. Banzuke. 力士の序列を刻む一枚の紙からその名が消えていた3年間を土俵という空間に書き起こすと沈黙の輪郭が初めて形をとる。The conventional Yokozuna lineage describes him as a clean ascent, low ranker, Ozeki, Yokozuna in a single line. But between summer 1895 and spring 1897, the line was not there. He had not been in Tokyo Sumo at all. A Meiji woodblock print fixes Jinmaku Kyugoro in fighting posture, his decorative apron tasseled and dense with pattern. The image is what the late 19th century preserved of Rikishi at full ceremony: color, weight, framed pose. The provincial circuit had none of this. He went west and joined the Nagoya circuit, one of the regional Sumo organizations the Tokyo Association did not recognize. For 3 years he wrestled there. The rankings he held in those years are not preserved in the Tokyo records. The bouts he won are not counted in his official tally. The Nagoya circuit left no photographs of its own. 5 wrestlers stand together inside a Dowanaumi stable training room. Varying builds, lean to heavy, the architecture of bodies a stable produces over time. The picture is later, but the lesson is the same one the Meiji veterans already knew. The veterans' verdict tightens into focus. To desert was not unheard of in late Meiji sumo. Tour conditions were hard, pay was thin, and wrestlers slipped away to provincial circuits and to civilian work. But the veterans agreed on the pattern. The deserter who came back weaker. He had lost his Keiko partners, his place in the hierarchy, and the structure that turned a body into a rikishi. A 1911 photograph fixes the man at his peak, powerfully built, standing outdoors in full ceremonial apron, his physique the visible answer to a question the records do not answer. What he did in those 3 years is the gap the sources cannot close. Nagoya Sumo in the mid-Meiji ran on different rules. A smaller dohyo, looser purses, traveling wrestlers from across the Kansai and Tokai regions. What survives is only what observers said afterward. He came back looking like a different man entirely. The lean torso of the boy nicknamed Ijin was gone. What replaced it was the physique of someone who had spent years doing something the Tokyo records did not follow. A woodblock print of the 12th Yokozuna Jinmaku Kyugoro frames the ceremonial weight of the rank. The thick rope belt, the apron heavy with tassels, the posture of a man entitled to the center of the ring. The tradition steps aside for the returning name. Spring 1897. He returned to Tokyo. The Dowanaumi stable master of the old line had already died, and he was placed under the first Takasago Uregoro. He took a new name, Hitachiyama Taniamon, drawn from the mountain that watched over his Mito hometown. A hand-colored photograph from around 1886 captures a sumo match in progress. 2 men grappling inside a canopied arena, the referee in robes between them, the crowd packed around all sides. The lighting is midday, the atmosphere is full house. Day 1 of the return arrives. His first bout back was scheduled for the May 1897 Basho. His opponent on day one was Nishi no Umi, a rising wrestler who would later become the Oyakata Mutsu. The Tokyo regulars who came to see whether the deserter could survive or return saw something like the scene captured here. The bout itself is not in any photograph. What survives of the moment is what the hand-colored plates of the era could approximate. Two men inside a canopied arena, the lockup at the center of the ring, the crowd leaning forward from every side. The May 1897 return match would have looked like this from the stands. A grappling, a balance broken, a body thrown. The throw acquires its texture. He lost. Nishino Umi caught him in his Umigawa, a body and arm lock throw, and put him down outside the ring. Day one, and the deserter went down to a wrestler not yet in the top division. The veterans in the stands sat back. The pattern, it seemed, had held. A young Hitachiyama sits for a studio portrait, hair and top knot, kimono crisp with family crest. The face is composed, almost watchful. The features are the same ones the veterans had once dismissed as ordinary. What followed the loss surprised the room. The story should have ended there. Most deserters who lost the return bout drifted out of Tokyo Sumo within a year or two. But something else happened. Within 3 basho, the man who returned as Hitachiyama was unrecognizable to wrestlers who had faced him as Nishiyama.
別人という言葉が単なる比喩ではなかったことは、同時代の三横綱の年齢別勝利数を並べてみれば、その軌跡が雄弁に証明する。Side by side, the careers of 3 great Yokozuna of the era cross at the years when their primes coincided. Wins by age, the curves tracking one another across the data.
The body precedes the numbers. Observers wrote that from around the time he re-entered the Makushita ranks, his physical development became rapid. The Western nickname disappeared. The lean torso filled out. The kendo training his uncle had drilled into him in Tokyo now lived inside the body of a heavyweight rikishi. The body was the first evidence. The numbers came later. 2 rikishi in formal dress stand alongside 2 men in Western suits. Hitachiyama and Umagatani, photographed together, the world they had entered and the world that had entered them, visible in the same frame. Umagaya's testimony arrives across the years. The second generation Umagaya, a Yokozuna already spoken of in the same breath as Tanikaze, told the story this way. He had known Nishiyama in the lower ranks. He had barely registered the face. When he saw the wrestler back from 3 years away, he was astonished. The man, Umagaya said, had become something he had not expected. A 1909 commemorative postcard fixes the opening of the Kokuji Kan in a sketch ringed by portrait medallions, the wrestlers and officials who had built the modern sport, faces from 6 decades of the ring assembled around the new arena. The veteran Sumo observer Sakakura Matashiro, who claimed not to have missed a single day of an official tournament in 60 years, said it more plainly. He had known the wrestler as Nishiyama and judged him ordinary. He had paid little attention. Wrestlers who deserted, Sakakura said, came back diminished, as a rule. Hitachiyama, alone among them, had come back stronger. A 1789 woodblock triptych preserves the first Yokozuna promotion, Tanikaze Kajinosuke to the right, Onogawa Kisaburo to the left, the Tsuna belts marking their new status. The scene is the founding act of the rank itself. A century later, the pairing repeated. He moved up the Banzuka quickly. By January 1900, he held the East lead position. Umagaya, the wrestler he had first faced in January 1895 as a low ranker, sat at West Ko-mu Subi, the lowest of the 3 titled ranks. The rivalry the audience had not noticed 5 years earlier was beginning to take shape. Newspapers were already comparing them to Tanikaze and Onogawa. A 1945 aerial photograph fixes Tokyo in the aftermath of firebombing. Vast tracts of rubble,
the river cutting through the destruction, and at the right of frame, the domed Kokuji-kan still standing. Decades earlier, this was where the modern sport would be built. The arena's centrality predates the dome. The promotions came. By 1903, both wrestlers stood at Ozeki, the rank just below Yokozuna. The Tokyo Association rebuilt itself around the pair. Newspapers compared them to Tanikaze and Onogawa of the Kansei era more than a century earlier. Attendance at Eko-in reached levels not seen since the late Edo era. The Kokuji-kan that would house all of this had not yet been built. The crowds were still at Eko-in. A 1941 photograph fixes a Yokozuna performing the Dohyo Iri inside a packed Kokuji-kan. Futabayama at the right of the frame, the audience pressed in tier upon tier behind him. Decades earlier, the May 1903 bout drew the same kind of full house at the wooden arena that preceded it. The decisive afternoon takes its place in the lineage. May 1903, West Ozeki Hitachiyama met East Ozeki Umegaya. The match was hard-fought. Hitachiyama won by Tsukiyo Toshi, a thrust down, the Kimarita that ended it. He finished the basho with a perfect record. 6 men stand together in a Meiji University athletics group photograph. Baseball, kendo, judo, sumo, the disciplines side by side in a single frame. The image fixes a Meiji sporting world that had begun to think of itself as a system. The Yokozuna rank entered that system in pieces. The granting of those 2 licenses began something the wrestlers themselves had not planned. The consciousness of Yokozuna as a rank, not a ceremony or a permission, but a position on the Banzuke, dates from that double promotion in 1903. 6 years later, the rulebooks would catch up. Today, the green-roofed Kokuji-kan rises above the Ryogoku skyline, its pyramidal roof one of the most recognizable shapes in Tokyo. The current building dates from 1985, but the institution it houses traces directly to the wooden arena that opened on this site in 1909. The thread reaches back to the founding year. 6 years after the dual license, the sport reorganized itself around the 2 wrestlers. February 1909. The Japan Sumo Association revised its rules and declared Yokozuna Ozeki to be the highest-ranking position. June 1909, the Ryogoku Kokuji-kan opened. From that year on, the sport carried the name Kokugi, the national art. The 1911 portrait returns. Hitachiyama, in full ceremonial apron, standing outdoors, the body the gap years had built. The photograph fixes the moment after the ascent, before the decline. That is what the gap explains. The wrestler who entered the Kokuji-kan in 1909 as one of 2 reigning Yokozuna had spent 3 years inside a sumo world the Tokyo Association did not officially acknowledge. He had lost his return bout. The veterans had written him off. Everything afterward, the rebuilt body, the calm in the ring, the stable he would later run, sat on top of those 3 years, not on top of an unbroken record. At Tomioka Hachimangu in Tokyo, a stone monument stands for the Dawano Umi School of Sumo. The Ichiman he built, the wrestlers he trained, the institution that outlasted him. On a city map, the distance from Mito to Tokyo looks short. The route from Matsusaka through Nagoya back to Tokyo was not. A 1937 photograph fixes 5 Dawano Umi wrestlers in a training room. Their builds the range a stable produces, lean to massive. The architecture of a generation passed through the same dohyo. The Oyakata's work shows through the lineage. He took the name Dawano Umi in retirement and built the stable into the largest of the early Showa era. The wrestlers he trained, Tochijiyama, Onishiki Uichiro, Tsunenohana, became Yokozuna in their own time. He oversaw the Kokuji-kan's reconstruction after the 1923 earthquake
and laid the groundwork for the prosperity that followed. A 1905 photograph closes the bookend. Hitachiyama at center in ceremonial sumo attire, two attendant wrestlers kneeling before him, a mixed crowd of Japanese and Western dress gathered near tents in the background. The man at center had once walked off a tour at Matsusaka. The bookend closes. The post town at Matsusaka still sits on the old road to Ise. The Konishiki touring party was the last thing the official Banzuka saw of him before the gap opened. What the gap contained, the partners he wrestled, the rules he learned, the body he built, is the part of the Yokozuna story no license can record. The deserter had written it himself. In the years, no license records.